because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are, and we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Welcome to Cows in the Field. This is a show in which we discuss philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today we're talking about Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey.
After years of war, no one could stand between my men and home.
And our guest today is Bilge Ebiri. Bilge is a critic at New York Magazine and Vulture, and you've heard him here on Cows talking about Nickel Boys, Oppenheimer, Bram Stoker's Dracula, In the Line of Fire, and Excalibur. So this is the sixth time you've been on the show, Bilge. We're so grateful to have you. Welcome back.
Oh, thank you. And that's what a list of movies.
It's a nice lineup.
That's a good list of movies I've talked to you guys about.
Good crew. And many of those were your suggestions, so we are grateful for you wanting to talk to us about those. Okay, so guys, we have to just get into this right now. Christopher Nolan made The Odyssey into a movie. Bilge, I want to ask you this. The first question, this gets announced over a year ago. Like, what are your initial thoughts when you hear that Christopher Nolan is making The Odyssey?
When it got announced, I remember thinking, and I don't remember if I said anything about this at the time, because Oppenheimer is one of those movies, and he's had a couple of those movies, and I love it when directors do this, when they have a movie and you think to yourself, what the hell could they possibly do after this?
Yeah.
It's not just a size thing. It's just kind of you get the sense that they've just poured all their soul and their life essence into something. And it feels in some ways so personal. And it's usually monumental in some way. And then he announces The Odyssey, and I was like, oh, right, yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah. That is like the natural, that is literally like the only thing he could potentially do. But on another level, I was really excited. So I have a weird personal connection to this material. My grandfather was an archaeologist in Turkey and specializing in, ancient Greece. And he somehow, through just like the weirdest set of circumstances, wound up becoming an archaeologist and wound up becoming like one of Turkey's foremost archaeologists. And when I was a kid, I grew up with the tales of the Trojan War and of Odysseus, and like those were like the fairy tales. I didn't hear like the classic fairy tales. I heard the story of the ancient Greeks, and one of the things that really occupied my grandfather in the last years of his life, like it was kind of his dream project that he worked on for years and finally finished it, some years before he passed away, was this book called, it's Turkish, it's called Görsel İlyada, which means a visual Iliad. And, one of my grandfather's areas of expertise was ancient Greek pottery. This book is basically a look at how the Trojan War and also partly The Odyssey was depicted on ancient Greek art over the centuries. And it kind of tells the story, like he tells the story linearly, but through visual, references and talking about each one and kind of what it says about, the style of the art and kind of the interpretations of the material. So I was always interested in this stuff and, always felt like I had this weird personal connection to this stuff. So I was very excited just on that level.
Yeah.
All right. I got to ask you then, immediate follow-up. How did the film live up to your expectations?
I mean, it worked really well for me. I love the movie. The question I had going in was, and I read The Odyssey a couple of times over the years. The first time I read The Odyssey was in a Turkish translation when I was like a teenager. It was my grandfather's copy. I was sitting around the house in one summer and he had a copy there. If I remember correctly, there were even like annotations in there. So I remember reading that, not really getting much out of it just because, I mean, I knew some of the stories, but I did read it then. And then years later, I had the Robert Fitzgerald translation, which I read. But the thing that you always wrestle with is the Odyssey, like Homer's vision of heroism is so different in many ways than what we think of as heroism.
Yes.
Right? and this is the struggle with the Odyssey. And there's also like a weird Turkish angle to it because the Turks have kind of adopted Troy.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah.
Oh.
Like the Turks have kind of, I mean, the Troy, at least the site most people agree is
Yes.
Troy is in Turkey.
Yeah.
And is in fact on kind of right at the entrance to the Dardanelles. It's kind of in that area that ultimately leads to the Black Sea. In Turkish history. That's kind of been like the thing that makes Turkey what it is, right? The gateway to Europe and Asia, but also control of the trading routes, right? Which is very much. I mean, historical Troy was very much there, and it was sacked many times, probably for that reason. Homer's vision of Troy and the victory at Troy is one thing. Later centuries' visions of what happened at Troy is another. So there is this question of how do you tackle the Odyssey and maintain that? And Nolan, I mean, I love what Nolan did, which was you maintain it until you don't, and then you completely turn it on its head. And I remember saying this to one of my editors, I think sometime in January or February, and I was like, I think the Odyssey is going to be about genocide. Like, I actually think that's kind of what it's going to be about. And I was, like when I saw the film, I was like, yeah, like it feels like a radical reinterpretation, but it's in some ways the only interpretation, right? And in fact, there was, I don't know, did you guys see The Return?
We did.
Yeah.
Right, which is like not a great movie, although two great performances in it. I mean, I didn't love it, but even there, the sort of the PTSD angle and stuff like that, like it's very hard to do the Odyssey without doing ultimately what Nolan did, but Nolan kind of goes so kind of full bore into it that it becomes like your reality has just been totally altered.
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah. I mean, the thing that initially was sort of confounded me with the choice for him to do the Odyssey was how he was going to approach adapting the material. Now, because, one, Nolan hasn't really done anything this fantastical before. And two, the last sort of successful, really fantasy or fantastical thing, I think was what I would say would be like Lord of the Rings. And it's so fallen out of fashion. And are they, my question was, how is he going to do this with gods and Cyclopses and Scylla and Charybdis and all? Just like how is he and how's he going to integrate that into his kind of approach to filmmaking and his style, which is generally one like a very realistic and grounded one. So when we sit down and we get the first opening line, it's a time of apparent magic. I thought, okay, well, this is sort of setting the stage for what's to come. Like, it's very much.
That opening line, I was like, oh yeah, here we go.
Yeah.
Like immediately I was like, that's my guy.
Yes. Right? There's going to be stuff on the cutting room floor. And I think, for me, I think the thing that was so that made me so happy with this adaptation is that he made it his own. I feel like his own anxieties are coming through in the story in ways that I think are not like shoehorned in. Like as you said, like this is what they did at Troy, like what you would do anytime you would sack a city, but in particular what they did at Troy in terms of like the murder and rape and pillaging and all that is bad, and there's a fallout from that he's exploring. And of course there's a fallout from the Trojan horse itself, which he tackles in a really interesting way, in a way that, as far as I can tell, is not in the poem at all, even though there are these dimensions. It's the central thing that he sees himself as having broken, Xenia, or what he calls Zeus's law, is just littered throughout the poem. The poem in Emily Wilson's telling is like a poem about hospitality and the value of hospitality. And like he takes that and he says, well, like, isn't the central thing that we did, that we're celebrating me for in Troy, a violation of the law, of this law of hospitality?
And here's a fascinating thing for me. I mean, obviously, I mean, this is a whole other conversation, and this is the Homeric question, obviously. But like, the Iliad and the Odyssey, attributed to Homer, probably not written by the same person, if they were even composed by a person. Like we don't really know the sources of these things, right? Or the poems themselves. Obviously, the sources are elsewhere, but And at the same time, if you look at the Iliad and the Odyssey and you do the kind of auteurist reading of it, there's a weird kind of sort of twisted symmetry between the two works, because the Iliad, if you guys have read it, I assume you have, is just endless scenes of people being mutilated and I mean, it is just like intense descriptions of all the horrible things that are happening to these people. And then like and then but then also every once in a while there'll be some flashback to, and this person who was the apple of his mother's eye and who was raised by his grandmother, blah blah blah blah. And it's like, and then they like cut out his heart and chopped it into pieces. I mean, it's just like it's so gory, but also at times so heartbreaking. And you read the Iliad and it is just like all this slaughter, and it kind of doesn't resolve itself into anything. And then there is this kind of absence, right? The absence of the Greek victory at Troy, which we hear about through other sources and presumably was portrayed in these other poems. And then we have the Odyssey. And the Odyssey, while there is quite a bit of gore in the Odyssey as well, especially at the end when the suitors are massacred, but so much of the Odyssey is feasts and banquets, and it's all sort of like cooking methods and describing how they cover the beef in barley, and then it's like all this, so much eating happens, like so much killing happens in the Iliad and so much eating happens in the Odyssey that it's hard not to look at them and see kind of this like weird mirror image, and see the Odyssey as a kind of story of how hospitality has been poisoned in some way in all of this stuff. And then it obviously it ends with the slaughter of it doesn't end technically with the massacre. It actually ends with like them trying to like
it ends with the next cycle,
having killed all the bright young men of Ithaca. But so like there is a weird kind of continuity between the two poems that I think actually Nolan, I don't know if he does this intentionally, but he does get at that.
Yeah.
It does get to the fact that the slaughter that happens in the Iliad and just the graphic nature of everything that happens in the Iliad, there has to be a kind of reckoning in it. And if you see the Odyssey in that light, it's actually fascinating.
One thing that is, I think, another challenge for someone like Nolan adapting this at the scale that he is adapting it is he needs to make the protagonist or a viewpoint character of Odysseus a sympathetic one to a modern audience.
Mm-hmm.
And Odysseus, as portrayed in the Odyssey, is sympathetic to what I would imagine would be sympathetic to the ancient audience, to an audience whose value system is one that is very different from our value system, which has been sort of infused with Christian, values and that sort of thing. And this is a society that cared about power and strength and certain type of honor, and that honor might involve killing. Like you might need to kill to take vengeance out of, and how is he going to make that legible to us and make this character feel like we could root for him? And I think he has to make certain changes to the character as a result of this. And I think, or at least, that's a strategy for doing that. And I think that's again, what he does by making Odysseus sort of guilt-ridden and also an Oppenheimer type character in a way, reckoning with the fallout of his actions, immediately makes him sympathetic in the modern eye, because he shows self-awareness in a way that the Odysseus in the poem, I think, is aware of stuff, and he's obviously smarter than everyone, but isn't. It's not as if these things would have needed to be called attention to. I mean, I take it. I mean, the way it's presented is like, and then he, like, just one example that I find just fascinating, just to speak to the amount of violence that's in these poems. The character of Melanthius in the Odyssey, this is the character played by Logan Marshall Green. He's one of the, like, not suitors, but he's one of the servants in the house who betrays them. He gives the suitors weapons. He is tied up and his genitals are cut off and fed to dogs.
Yeah,
so like it's like, is Nolan going to do this? I'm wondering, like, is he going to? But of course, you can't
Are
in
all
a
the
way.
are all the maids going to be hung?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
like-
First he makes them clean up the
Yeah.
the death and destruction of all the people who were raping them, and then he hangs them and tortures them.
Well, and I think was it Odysseus wants them slaughtered, but Telemachus is like, let's hang them.
Exactly. Telemachus give them the slow death because he's been so pissed about how they've been treating him and the family. Anyway, no, so I mean, again, this is a real challenge to do. And I think I've been reading all kinds of stuff, and you read people, especially people who are very close to the text. So that's why I was curious your thoughts immediately when you told us about your background with the text. But they have expressed a lot of concern with this adaptation, in particular because of its departures in various ways from the source material. And so I think I'm issuing a little bit of an apology in the old sense of explanation of why Nolan is likely doing this. I mean, he needs to make this character legible. And actually, sorry, let me just say this briefly. I'll let me say the one criticism that I think is worth kind of maybe unpacking here. In Emily Wilson, who was the translation that apparently inspired Nolan, to do this, or at least he mentioned it in some maybe he mentioned it to you, Bilge. The Emily Wilson translation.
No, we didn't talk. I mean, he's read all the translations.
Yeah, but one of them that has been on people's minds. So Emily Wilson has been a critic of the film, and one of the things she said is, so her opening line is, tell me about a complicated man. So she looks to see a portrayal of Odysseus as complicated. And then she said that, I don't think this is a complicated movie. This is a direct quote. And I don't think it's even about a complicated man. I think it's quite a simple action hero movie about an action hero who feels bad about being an action hero. So that's a direct quote from Emily Wilson. So I think, to a certain extent, I think I will disagree with her claim about him being complicated as portrayed in the movie, but I think some of the softening that she sees, that she's speaking to, is, I think, born of the result of Nolan trying to make the character legible to a modern audience. That's my thought.
And I totally get that. I mean, it's probably impossible if you've lived with a text this long and this to that degree to be able to step away from it and accept another version of it, because remember, Nolan isn't translating the text. Nolan is, I mean, he's translating it into a film, and that's a very different. It's a very different vernacular. It's a very different sort of identification pattern. Like there's a text we connect with a text through the text, right, through the language. With a film, especially a film like this, modern movie, let's say, we connect through characters. We connect through characters and incidents. So it's for Nolan to give us an Odysseus that is, like totally authentic to the Odysseus we get in Homer. That would be the equivalent of Emily Wilson not translating the Odyssey.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly.
That would be her like saying, "Oh yeah, here's my version of the Odyssey," and it's just like
the Greek. Yeah, the Greek. Yeah. No, yeah, I think that's right. I think the other thing that again, just to issue this like explanation of, I think what Nolan is doing and what I appreciate about it is, even though the film, I will say this, I'm going to give and take something here. I felt the film left me wanting another movie about the Odyssey. Which is crazy because, of course, and I don't critique that as a real criticism of Nolan insofar as it just is more of a celebration of the original poem. And there's just so much in it that there's all these things that he didn't explore that I would have loved to have seen on the screen. Okay, great. With that said, I'm so happy that we got such a personal and unexpected, in a way, take on the material. And I think that I think is what's really special. And what more can you want from somebody providing an interpretation of a text in film than to just give a clear, there's like a clear purpose and vision to what he's trying to do. And it's extremely legible. And it's the sort of thing that has inspired discussion. Like, what more can we want from this?
And it's in film, there's always this criticism of filmmakers who kind of do the big projects like this. I mean, this was a criticism of Kubrick back in the day. But this idea that, there's something cold and impersonal about what they do. And And with Nolan, especially with his most recent sort of run of films, it's almost like the opposite is the case. Like they've all felt intensely personal,
Extremely personal, yeah.
you know? And it's just kind of like, well, which one is it? Like, like, are you annoyed because they're like, impersonal and just giant, mega blockbusters that are like, hemorrhaging studio money? Or is it that he's bringing himself into it? Like, I actually like a filmmaker or any kind of artist bringing themselves into material like this is a good thing. Like in my world, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we want that. That's the thing we want. We want people to do that. For Christopher Nolan to do just a very straight adaptation of the Odyssey, well, that might be interesting, but I'm like, no, why?
Yeah,
Like, why would
exactly.
why do I want to see that? I can read the Odyssey,
And I think it speaks. Okay, so actually, let me just lead this into a question for all of us to answer, which comes from Jim Panola. So we threw out a question thing on Instagram. We got a few questions. So Jim wanted us to know, and this is just to structure our conversation. Jim is the host of an Invitation to the Invitation podcast, and he said, which of Nolan's previous films, but you have to pick one, is the closest sibling to the Odyssey, and why? So since we're talking about the personal nature of the Odyssey, what would you say is the closest sibling to the Odyssey? Maybe I'll throw this to Laura first, because I think she's seen this to give you a chance to think over your answer, Vilga.
Yeah, I know. Although, like, I don't know if there's one answer that feels the most obvious.
I know it's hard. It's hard.
I've got a couple answers that I could go with, but I will go with. I mean, Oppenheimer we've already like touched on this, because that one was the one that like felt the most overwhelmingly like clear as I was watching the movie. And then later other things sort of like other connections and themes to his previous films and other became more clear to me. But I think the visual, the auditory cue of the banging on the floor was what did it. We start with the bard, Travis Scott, banging on the floor with a staff telling the story of the Trojan horse and the victory at Troy. And then later when Odysseus finishes slaughtering all of the suitors, Telemachus and sort of like the remaining loyal servants start banging their swords against the floor. Mm-hmm. And that beat and the banging reminded me of the scene in Oppenheimer where they have successfully detonated the bomb and he's there. And Oppenheimer's basically going to give a victory speech that he sees like instead he's sort of seeing the fallout. He's like giving his victory speech as he's imagining what's happening to the people who are experiencing his baby, basically. And they're stomping on the floor, and that stomping goes from victorious to like horrifying as he's realizing that the one thing he's going to be remembered for is the thing that he is going to deeply regret for the whole rest, of his life. Yeah. And that's what's going to be sung about him. Like Oppenheimer knows that's what I'm going to be. Yeah. And Homer knows, and like it's an Odyssey, and Odysseus knows like that's what they're going to talk about. They're going to talk about the Troy, fall, my trickery, and that wonderful victory. And this is the thing. And like, my mistakes will be erased, and it will all just be songs. Mm-hmm. And so that's with that moment where they start banging the swords on the ground, I was like, oh wow,
that's awesome. That's a nice parallel to connect the two. Yeah. Bilge, I mean, maybe now that is Oppenheimer. Maybe let's take Oppenheimer off the table.
Sorry, I took the most obvious one.
Unless you want to add to Laura's thing, and then
I mean, Oppenheimer is kind of the answer. The thing I said about the film, the way I described it was like, it starts like Interstellar and it ends like Oppenheimer, and it's Dunkirk in the middle.
Oh, yeah. That's good.
I think, I mean, look, it's I can find connections to all
of them. Yes.
Right? Yeah. And the other thing I said, like, as soon as I saw the movie, I remember I said to my editors, I'm like, this is the third Christopher Nolan movie in which, the hero at the end leaves civilization behind to go live with Anne Hathaway. Yep.
Wait, third? Hold
Interstellar.
On. Right.
Dark Knight Rises.
They all end with him like abandoning civilization behind.
I've done what I needed to do.
Sometimes it's a cafe in Paris. Sometimes it's the Undying West or whatever. That's great. No, that's great. Yeah.
Planet on the other end,
or the planet,
you and your 10,000 embryos. But the other film I keep thinking of is actually The Dark Knight. In this sense, because The Dark Knight, I mean, structurally it's not like that, but the thing I always said about The Dark Knight, because I remember at the time people were kind of up in arms. There was this. Remember, it's so funny now that we've had all the kind of dumb debates about like the woke Odyssey and all that.
Yeah.
But there was a period of time when people thought Christopher Nolan was like a conservative
Yeah.
filmmaker. The Dark Knight, I remember there was this real brouhaha, and it was understandable where people were like, "Wait, at the end when Batman kind of creates this like, you know, basically illegal surveillance system
network,
to
yeah.
locate the Joker. Is this is this kind of an approval of, Bush era surveillance tactics?" And it's funny because if you look at the text of the film, no, it's actually like Batman kind of debasing himself and essentially, betraying the people of Gotham in order to defeat this villain, and he exiles himself at the end of the movie. So I think that there are actually resonances there. I think these are things that Nolan has always been thinking about. But here's the thing that Emily Wilson says that I think is there's a truth to it. He's an action hero who is depressed, sad about being an action hero. Well, she's not wrong, but that's not a terrible way to look at this. And like that's actually an idea that Nolan has worked over the course of his career. I mean, that's what makes his Batman movies, I think, so powerful and so fascinating is, he's adapting comic books, he's adapting this action hero that he was probably a fan of as a kid. I don't actually know much about his, relationship to Batman, but I assume he was. But like, when you grow up and you kind of start to wrestle with these ideas, these inconsistencies and these tensions reveal themselves to you, right? And what he does in those films is he makes movies about those tensions, which is not what other people have done. Like, I think that's fundamentally the mistake that a lot of other people have made with superhero movies is they kind of like they try to revert back to 13-year-old selves, or they kind of go in the other direction. They're like, well, these superheroes are badasses who kill people, and that's good, right? I mean, that's a simplification, but I think like I would say Zack Snyder kind of is unable to reconcile that tension. I think he's aware of that tension, but doesn't quite have the I don't know. I don't want to, this is not going to become a Zack Snyder
that's
thing,
fine.
but like it doesn't quite have the sensitivity of humanity to deal with it.
Yeah, to add, I mean, Civil War, I think in the Marvel universe is it's seeing there's a tension there, but it solves it with fighting.
But they try to resolve it in the ways that they can, but they also have to keep in mind that they are making movies ultimately for like
Absolutely.
kids, and again, these are all perfectly intelligent people. They're not like idiots and monsters, most of them. But I think Nolan, because he was able to kind of maintain as much control as he could over these things, and he went about making these films honestly and remaining true to sort of his own ideas, and because he's a serious guy, serious, thoughtful guy, I think he kind of relished the idea of making films about that tension, and that's what he did with those films. And yes, there's absolutely some of that in the Odyssey, but like, why shouldn't there be?
Absolutely. No, I don't think she's wrong in the description, but I think there's more to it. Here's my answer to. I'll preview the barest sense in the which I think there's a connection here. We'll get into it more later. But it's Memento, and I think Memento for me. I mean, I think what was so cool about the Odyssey for me is, I mean, wow, it feels like a late period work in the sense that it recontextualizes his entire filmography in a way. It's not a late period work. I hope he makes 40 more movies, but geez, like it does feel like a movie made by a guy who's really reflecting on his career and the anxieties that he's explored. But anyway, as far as Memento goes, I think the through line of Memento, just to remind people, it's a movie ultimately about a protagonist who deceives himself in order to overcome the guilt of having what he's done to his wife. And okay, now how is that going to play into the Odyssey? Well, here's just as a preview, and then we'll get into. I have a sort of a reading of the film that I haven't seen articulated yet that I want to just kind of get on the table. But before we get there, I think the key themes that are useful, and I think there's like a trio of them that are useful to think about with this film. And one sort of prong of the trio of themes is what we've already talked about a little bit, which is sort of guilt and shame. Like these two feel, emotions, which is something that clearly this character of Odysseus, this characterization of him, is going through.
I did come out of the theater being like, what did Nolan do? Like,
Yeah.
what is he so guilty
There's some
about?
Catholic schoolboy stuff, even though he's not a Catholic or wasn't raised Catholic, I mean, or whatever.
Like,
but like, there's some real.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's one. Okay, the other is actually maybe I think of four actually, but the other is faith. I mean, that's a theme that this keeps coming up again and again in this film, which I think is very interesting, and we'll come back to that in a second. One is also lies and storytelling, where the line between lying and telling a story, there is a line, but it's, both of these involve a kind of fabrication in the pursuit of something. And so what is the lying or the storytelling in the pursuit of? This is a theme which is definitely in the Odyssey. Like the Odyssey is a very self-reflexive poem in the sense that it's constantly talking about, like, there are stories within, there are people within the story of the Odyssey as bards who are telling stories, and it's constantly sort of reflecting on like what stories are for and why the value of them. And then the last little prong is the notion of like sort of modernity, or what you might think of as enlightenment, or what you might think of as civility. And I think of this as a kind of like the thing which we've hit on, but I'll just mention briefly now, which we can come back to, which is again that this film ends with a transition period in the course of human history, a transition period from a particular time of civility to a certain extent, but towards what will be, as historically we understand it, as a dark ages, where sort of knowledge has kind of gone away. But what we know to come after that is modernity, in the sense of like society comes back again, and the kind of knowledge that was the result of the kind of pursuits of people like Odysseus comes to the forefront. So again, I think those are kind of the things that I think are really crucial prongs, and we can again come back to each of these. But the reason I think it's connected to Memento is so if you think about the fact that Nolan didn't really include any gods in his movie. So this a very conscious choice to not explicitly depict any gods. Now, there's this question of Athena, and I'm curious, actually, maybe I will just start here. Like, I think there are a couple readings of what's going on with Athena. I think the most straightforward reading is that Athena is some sort of, projection of his conscience, which is why she appears in the form of the priestess of Athena who's beheaded in the sack of Troy. Okay. Of course, there are other interpretations. One is that it's really Athena, and she's speaking to him, and she's chosen to be in that form because she knows maybe she thinks she'll get through to him or whatever. Is this really? Do you think this is Athena coming to him, or what might tell one way or the other? Because if it is, then you might think, oh, Athena's the only god that's depicted. That's one way to interpret this. Or you might just think, no, there are just no gods at all. Like, this is a purely this is a world similar to our own, where there presumably Zeus doesn't exist.
I interpreted her as very much a projection of his guilt. But at the same time, I do think that there absolutely is space in the movie to interpret the presence of the gods through the things that she says. When she says, "Who doesn't understand thunder or fire?" or a child laugh, or because that's I mean, there is thunder and fire in the movie.
Yeah,
right,
and people are constantly being reminded of it, and then they talk as though Zeus is present. I think, no, there's a possibility, like there's a way to interpret the film where the gods are there, they're just kind of not showing themselves in the very dramatic ways that they do in the poem.
Yeah, but the thing that and now here's another Nolan movie we haven't mentioned is Inception.
Yes.
The thing about Inception that I always, because there are various conversations happening throughout Inception, right? Some of them are just expository, but then there's a lot of stuff. Like, I remember, like, whenever Leonardo DiCaprio's character is talking to Mal, his wife, played by Marion Cotillard, you have to, I have to remind myself, and I think this is very much baked into the movie.
Yep.
She's not there.
Yeah.
He's talking to himself.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And that's an idea in Nolan that has, that runs through the course of his movie, of his movies. And in fact, there is this great scene in the Odyssey. And I was actually trying to look through my notes to see if I wrote down what they actually say. But this is when he's discovered his people eating the sun god's cattle.
Yes.
Right. And he's walking away from them and he's talking to her. And there's this whole conversation that happens about she's asking him why are you so hard on yourself? And there's this constant it's a question they're having a conversation essentially about free will and consequence. And it seems like it's a conversation between him and Athena. And then once you realize who Athena was later, that scene gains completely new dimension, because then you realize that's him arguing with himself. That's him that's the voice inside his head, basically kind of asking him why he blames himself for this. So I think that, I'm much more sympathetic to the view that she isn't a goddess, that she is basically a projection of his guilt. But then again, as an atheist, I kind of think that's what gods are, But also, there's other people have noted that there are little things that Nolan puts in the film that could be interpreted as the gods, right? Because when Calypso it finally kind of relents in telling him and letting him go, there's a crack of thunder.
Yes, absolutely. It seems almost to convince her. Yeah.
Yeah. She definitely, perks up.
Zeus is all right, hurry this up. You got to go.
I mean, and in the poem, it's Zeus. It's through the messenger. I think Hermes comes and says hey, it's time to let him go.
And again in the poem, and I mentioned this in one of my pieces, but the beggar that shows up early on in Ithaca and tells Telemachus you got to go to Sparta, they'll tell you where Odysseus, what happened. That's Athena in the poem, right? And he's that character is here, and Telemachus says you have wise eyes, you have Athena's eyes, but he does in fact he does do the thing that Athena is supposed to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's right.
So they're there. The actors, the characters don't see them, but then again, the characters generally don't see them in Homer either. We see them because he describes them, but the characters don't actually see them. They do a couple of times, but most of the time, no. So I do think that all the interpretations are valid. I'm sympathetic to one interpretation. I think Nolan is sympathetic to that interpretation.
That's you get that feeling. Okay, but here's what I want to do. I want to take that interpretation, but let's push it further, because here's a tension in that interpretation, which is this, that I think we can just resolve, and once you resolve it, it opens up another way of thinking about everything in the entire film and how he's refigured the entire poem. So a tension in this interpretation is that Odysseus is also depicted as encountering a giant cyclops that eats them, a Scylla that has 6 heads, and a giant whirlpool, a woman who turns his men into pigs, giants that, they don't eat them, but, and trees that move and trap people. Okay, so how do you reconcile that with that? Okay, so now here's
or the fact that every prophecy comes true.
And every prophecy comes true. He goes to he goes to hell.
He does go to hell.
He talks to dead people.
Come back.
Yeah. Okay. So now the reconciliation of these is that all of that takes place in the story that he recites, and this is true in the poem too. Except he's in the poem, he's reciting it to the Phaeacians. Here, Nolan smartly just cuts them out because it's a lot of washing up on beaches and stuff. So he just puts that into the Calypso bit. He's telling it as a story to Calypso. And what is going on in that? It's basically Calypso has been changed from woman goddess who entraps him and kind of makes him her love slave to his therapist, basically. She's sitting there telling him remember. And only after he's able to fully recount all the stories is he finally able to come to terms with whatever he's done and go home. So what he's gone through in the modern context is he's gone through therapy. He just sat through a therapy session over however many years with Calypso and recited all these stories. So that tells you then that what we should be looking for in each of these stories is some key to him processing some part of whatever he needs to get over. So you could think of the stories as themselves made up. They're illusory within the context of the film. They're not reflecting any sort of reality of the film. They're symbolic. They have symbolic significance for some dimension of whatever shame or guilt or whatever it is that he's processing or has repressed and needs to bring to the surface. And so anyway, that's when I got to that point, I thought, okay, now this is interesting because we're going to go through all the sequences of the film. We could talk about them, but I'm going to keep coming back to this idea. Like, the question being, what is he processing through this fantastical thing that he's recounting to Calypso?
You guys did the interview with oh god, I'm forgetting.
That's right, Tom Schoen on the
Tom
Nolan
Schoen,
variations.
right. Yeah,
yes.
exactly. And that was a great episode. I remember. But this idea of so much of Nolan's work essentially being about kind of a secular vision of the world contending with fundamentally irrational and unexplainable things. I mean, the Odyssey is full of that, essentially. But the way he's conceived of the Odyssey, it's full of that idea. The original, Homer's Odyssey doesn't have any of that. But at the same time, you can also look at it as, well, this is kind of movie secularism, right? This is a world in which monsters exist, but gods don't, right? This is a world in which Freddy Krueger exists, but God doesn't. We don't really hear about God much, because that's the thing. It's like, movies can deal with the supernatural, but it's very hard to deal with the divine.
That's true. Yes, that's true. I mean, I like the thought, though, about, I guess, that I can't remember if we said it or if Tom said it about this. You're reflecting back at us about this sort of rational man coming to terms with the fact that the world is often irrational or inexplicable, and how do we, there's tension at the center of it. Because in a way, I think part of what makes Nolan's Odysseus complicated, to come back to Emily Wilson's characterization of him in the poem and her concern that this Odysseus is not complicated. I think part of the reason he is complicated in Nolan's view, in a way that is very different from the poem, is that he's, I think, a man out of time in a way. So this is very much like Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer is described as someone who sees the future before it can happen, in a way. And he's sort of a man of the future. He creates the future. And I think Odysseus is similarly. So Odysseus for Nolan is refigured as what I would think of as a modern sort of secularist person, someone who would be legible to us. His men and everyone around him, or many of the people around him, but in particular his men, are much more spiritual and prone to superstition. And he's constantly correcting them. They say, like, "Oh, we've angered the gods," and he's like, "Just chill, we didn't do anything to the gods." One direct quote is, he says, he's reciting, I think, to Calypso. He says, "My men were convinced we had been cursed by Poseidon." Again, the implication that he doesn't believe that. He defies the gods. He even says this explicitly at various points. Another example of this is, his pragmatism is front and center rather than his fidelity to the ritual traditions. So it happens so many times that someone dies and they're like, "We got to bury this guy. We need to honor him." And he's like, no. We'll honor him by leaving. We're going to be pragmatic. We got to get out of here, and I'll get to the honoring later. So he's a pragmatist, and he's complicated in the sense that he's not in step with the times. And he's about to do something, or at least, he's done something that he's now worried is going to bring about a changing of the times. And he worries it will be a changing for the worse. Yeah.
I was going to say this. I feel like I've said this somewhere else before, and it's entirely possible I said it on one of your podcasts. I've certainly thought it, but like, I have this theory that maybe the most resonant work of literature ever is A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, because it's kind of the light through which you can see so much of how we adapt the past, and especially in films, right? So many movies, if you look at so many period films, if you can really look at them and say, imagine that the protagonist of this movie is actually somebody from today that's been dropped into that, right? And that's sort of that's sort of the key to like making these things, relatable and interesting for today's audiences. You can't really, even something like Last of the Mohicans. Like, if you did Last of the Mohicans and you did it like totally faithfully to the novel, like, people would just run screaming, right? But if you do it kind of with the way that Michael Mann does it, then it's kind of like, okay, I get this guy. His allegiances feel right to me. I mean, there's so many films you can do that with, and as you said, Oppenheimer is essentially that, and the Odyssey is definitely that.
So much so.
This is a modern man that's been placed into.
That's what it feels like to me. He feels. I mean, the other thing I think is so interesting about Odysseus that is in the poem, but I think Nolan does such a good job of again translating it to us. Is he's curious and he's like a man of science. So where all his men are just like, let's eat. I need to eat and I need to get home and whatever. He's like, let's take a detour and go see the world. Let's see the world. When he encounters the sirens, he wants to hear the song. Like nobody else, they're like, no, we're going to die. He wants to hear the song. And in the poem, what is the song? The song is they reveal knowledge. They're like, we have knowledge. So it's this seeking of knowledge that's like a critical dimension of Odysseus that is in the poem. And he translates it so nicely. He has that Matt Damon deliver that line so offhandedly, but I love it where he says, nobody's ever heard it. I'll be the first to hear it. Again, like he's an explorer. He's a scientist. That's not the world of that Greece. That's the world of the Greece that comes after with Pythagoras and Socrates and so on. That's what comes in the ruins of this world. Grows out the civilization so Nolan does this brilliant thing of positioning Odysseus again as a man between these two times, bringing about the transition. But what I love, and this is just to mention one other connection to Oppenheimer, whereas Oppenheimer ends, because it ends with such great uncertainty, we don't know what the future holds. I mean, it ends with nuclear missiles being launched, and the potentially the destruction of the world. This ends on such an optimistic and hopeful note. Like not optimistic, but I mean hopeful. It ends with them riding off into the sunset.
It does. I mean, but he does say, all our mistakes will be
forgotten. Yes,
right.
But we know they'll be remembered. We know that the film itself is a refutation of the thing that he said in a way, because he's telling us it, like we remember we have to re-remember in a way. We have to relearn the mistakes of the past, but it's the story continues. Like the story is still with us.
Right. But at the same time, when he says all our mistakes will be forgotten, is he saying our mistakes will be forgotten, complimentary, or our mistakes will be forgotten derogatory? Like our mistakes will be forgotten, so they'll make the same mistakes again.
No, absolutely, that's right. But we know the ending. I mean, at least we know what comes after, which is humans, civilization as we know it is what is born out of this. Not nothing. Yes, it's a cycle, and yes, there's going to be another civilization that rises and also falls, and another that rises and falls, and there's this cyclical
Ra's al Ghul
thing.
Has to keep burning it down.
Batman Begins connection.
Sorry.
That's right. I mean, no, but it's. I mean, all this stuff runs through his films. That's one of the beautiful things about the Odyssey is that he absolutely made it a Christopher Nolan film.
Totally,
I mean, it fits just perfectly into the filmography.
The other connection I think that's really important to note here is the connection again between knowledge and the gaining of knowledge in this sort of it's not pre-literate because they were literate, but in the society in which travel is extremely difficult and takes a major toll. And so most people would live their entire lives in one place, is the notion of xenia or xenia, or what is called Zeus's law. Now in the film, it's described as basically the golden rule: do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. But what it really is, and I think Nolan has simplified that, but doesn't really change it from the poem, is it's about hospitality. It's about welcoming a stranger into your home, treating them with respect as though they might be gods in disguise. I think Telemachus says that explicitly. We have to think a bit about the ancient world is obviously one that's extremely different from us. Even though the space that these guys are traveling in is from our perspective not that big, a bit in the Mediterranean Sea and stuff, but the trips would take months and would be extremely treacherous, and think about the boats they're on and so on. And so the value of Xenia is that it promotes this kind of travel between long distances. And what does that do? It brings information. And it brings stories, entertainment, because that's what the Odyssey would have been for those people. It would have been some guy, traveling entertainer, like a bard or whatever, comes through. He's got a bunch of stories in his pocket, and he would come to the court and entertain people with his stories. or probably his or her, I don't know. And so this idea of Zinnia is like, might seem weird to us from the perspective of like, I'm not going to let some random person into my home and feed and clothe them and bathe them. That seems kind of insane from our perspective, but from that perspective, and Penelope articulates this really nicely. She's like, she's always interested in, oh, what's this beggar stranger coming? Tell me the stories. Like that's where she gets knowledge from the outside world because she's stuck here.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's this great conversation between her and Telemachus, when they talk about the people from the sea. And the first time they talk about the people from the sea, and Telemachus says, isn't that just traveler's tales? And she says, all we know of the world is traveler's tales. That's how we found out Troy had fallen, and I mean, right there, he connects the ideas together, but also it's hard. I mean, it's very hard to really render that idea cinematically because you would really have to experience it. But it does make you think about it a little bit. And maybe this is something the film could have been more explicit with, just in terms of allowing people to understand just how important it was to just like, they don't have newspapers.
Yeah.
History hasn't been invented.
Exactly.
Yet.
Yeah.
Right. Like Herodotus isn't going to be born for another like 800 years. Like, like there's just, they know nothing. They live in like what we would consider just almost unimaginable darkness, cognitively. A new person, like there's a person here that we've never seen before. And they've seen things we don't know about. Like, come in, here, have some pig. Like, let's talk. I mean, it is a thing that once you kind of wrap your head around it, it's a fascinating way to think about the psychology of this world.
Absolutely. Here's the other aspect of it that I think is so interesting, and this is again in the poem, also in the movie. But the idea is like they might be gods in disguise, but in a way, they are just like the gods, because in the poem, the gods, what they do, they just come down and they tell people stuff. They give people information. That's all they're basically doing, is they're coming and giving out information. Like Athena in disguise is basically just like, hey, you should, I'm bringing some stories from this and that. I've heard Odysseus is alive. You should go find out if he's alive. Go check in with Menelaus. And I think, so it's just makes it so explicitly and connects these things that like the traveler brings information. That's exactly what the god does. So the traveler is equated with the god. So treat them with respect as you would a god.
I mean, this idea of Xenia that runs throughout the poem and that, Nolan definitely works into the film, it also runs through the Iliad and through kind of some of the, stories around the Trojan War, and also the causes, quote unquote, causes of the Trojan War, right? I mean, stealing Helen was a betrayal of Xenia,
yes. Yes.
So it's not just like that. Xenia is almost like it's almost like a dogma. Like it's not just this kind of idea. It's an actual belief system.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like that's kind of, it's not just hospitality. It's almost a law.
Right.
I mean, it is Zeus's law, right? But like, and breaking it is like breaking the law.
Yeah. No. Totally.
You're punished for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's, again, what's so interesting about Odysseus's refiguration of his breaking the law. What he sees is, well, there are no gods to punish me. I have to punish myself. Like the punishment comes from within. It's an internal punishment. Although he does, and well, actually, I think the greatest punishment he has to endure is at the end when Calypso says, you have to now take your punishment. What is the punishment? He has to get on a raft and just float. He has to surrender himself to the sea and have total faith that he'll be, he's not going to be in control anymore. He has to give it up. And it's something that Nolan is interested in. It comes back again and again. It's an Inception. And it's this thing which is, it's aggravating to a rational mind. The rational mind's like, give me a reason. And the answer is, there's no reason. You just do it. And you think, this is crazy. Yeah, I don't like that.
Well, and also if you think about a filmmaker, filmmakers, especially filmmakers working at this level, are like the biggest control freaks.
Yes.
Yes, the worst.
Yeah, I mean, so to Christopher Nolan, like whenever they're so many of his films have this like leap of faith concept in it, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I'm like, to him, that's probably the most terrifying thing.
Yes.
Well, he's also this very rational guy, right? He loves the mechanistic world. His films are constantly like explaining within their own logic of the movie what is happening so that he could justify it to himself, and because he thinks that's really important. He's, he's a materialist in that sense, not in the sense of he wants to buy stuff, but in the sense that he looks for material and physical explanations of things within the local context. He's not someone who would be satisfied with a deus ex machina or the equivalent of like, oh, the god just did it, which the poem is full of that. It's just like, oh no, Zeus just decided this. And you're like, wait, why? It's like, I don't know. The gods are capricious.
Yeah, I mean, during the massacre of the suitors, it's just like the gods basically kind of pushing away their weapons, like they can never hit Odysseus.
Yeah,
because the gods are that seems like an unfair fight.
Yes, an unfair advantage, man. And also like they pour like glory on him, which makes him look huge. I mean, he does look huge in this. He had to get that glory by working out a lot.
Yeah, although like when he talked to you, Bilge, he was like, "Yeah, I kind of just had to maintain a normal weight." I was like, "What?"
No,
I mean, he didn't say normal, but he was like, "I need to look lean." I was like, "That's lean? Okay, sir."
Well, it's funny. It is funny when you talk to. There's certain things you talk to actors about, and you're just like, "Oh, these people live in a completely different universe, a completely different physical reality than me." Because he's just like, oh, it was just really nice because I just got to this one weight.
I just had to stay at that one weight.
And Chris was like, yeah, I just maintain this. And he was like, yeah, it was really nice. I'm like, yeah, man, if I could fucking maintain a weight, come on. It's just, it is really, every once in a while, the world opens up in that way.
I know.
I know.
They see the world so differently than we do.
Yeah. Where I was like the descript, like that, like when he says, "What weight are you at? Just stay there." I was like, "What? Is there a button I can push and just stay at a weight?" That's crazy.
Well, partly was his job to stay at that weight.
Yes.
I mean,
he's got a nutritionist and
he's got a lot of
routines and like it's
you're
a lot of work.
Paid to do this. You're not making any other movies. It's literally you're just sitting around all day maintaining weight.
Yeah. Amazing.
Okay, so I want to just talk through the different central sequences of the film, and feel free to just say when we get to your favorite of the sequences. So the first one I think would be, I mean, of course, I'm not going to talk through like all of the film, but like the central adventure-y sequences of the film that are included are the Cyclops. We start with the Cyclops. And I mean, Bilge, what did you think of the Cyclops and the, I mean, I guess he made this puppet. I have no idea how he did any of that.
So the Cyclops is fascinating. I talked to the visual effects director and the special effects coordinator about how they did the Cyclops. They did everything for the Cyclops. They used all sorts of things because originally they were going to use these like giant puppets, but this is before they knew where they were going to shoot it. And Nolan himself had said to everybody, he was like, "We're not going to use a real cave." He's like, "I have lots of experience with caves. I did bat caves. We're not going to shoot it. Shooting in a real cave would be insane. We're going to do this on the soundstage at the end of the shoot when we're in LA." And then early on, like he and Ruth De Jong, the production designer, they visit Nestor's cave in Greece, and she's like, "This is great. Why don't we shoot here?" And he's like, "No, that'd be crazy. We can't do it." And then he's like, yeah, actually, let's shoot it. So all these people that are developing puppets to be used like 7 months later are suddenly like, "Hey, listen, actually, we're going to shoot in a month and we're going to shoot in this actual fucking cave."
That's crazy.
Oh my
Suddenly it becomes this whole other production. So they used lots of different things. But the one thing about Nestor's cave that they said was really cool was that it has a hole at the top of it. So they could just kind of put down rigging and stuff like that to sort of move stuff around. So, I mean, there's like the giant hand, which everybody said reminds them of like the Jackass gag with the soup where they have this giant like swivel hand that slaps people. So they've used all these things. But what I found fascinating, one thing they told me, Bill Irwin was with this production from the very beginning because they kept having him come in to do different things. But one thing that they told me, which I thought was really cool, is so the eye, that's like so the performance that he's giving as he's moving is in fact the same performance as what we're seeing with the eye and the nose. They just took that digitally and tipped it so that it's not
interesting.
like it's all connected.
Uh-huh.
Like it's not a thing that he did later that they then put in. It was
Yeah.
just, it's all the same performance. They just kind of modified it
Got
digitally.
it. So his eyes are feeling what his body is feeling and like
Yeah.
expressing all in
And,
one. Yeah.
and this is the thing that I really love about Nolan, just on this like really kind of very minute technical level. This importance he gives to performance and authenticity and all these little like that seems like such a minor detail, right? I mean, it's obviously an impressive technical feat, but you're like, well, he could have come in and done the face stuff later too, right? But it's like with the ADR stuff, like he doesn't like automate, the dialogue replacement after the fact. Like he hates it. He does not do it. Nobody comes in after everything's edited to come into a sound booth and re-record their lines of dialogue. He does not do that. What he does is he just does the scene. If they don't know if they have enough, all the sound, they run through the scene on location without the cameras running, so they get clean sound of it. And then they just use that, and his editors are now very astute at being able to sort of place that stuff. That was obviously a big issue when he was shooting with like the IMAX cameras that don't let you shoot sound. Less of an issue now, but that dedication to authenticity, which also probably saves them money. That's the other thing. It actually probably saves them a lot of money because they don't have to then pay an actor to come in and do ADR. Like that stuff actually costs money. Whereas having them just on the set after you're done shooting the scene and saying, let's just do the whole scene again and just record wild sound, that costs you nothing, and all these little things that he pays attention to, I think, are so important ultimately to the effect of the films and to the effectiveness of the films.
Just on a technical level, I see the Cyclops, and I know that there's maybe some CGI, but it's used sparingly, and I know there's a lot of in-camera stuff. But I look at it and I go, I have no idea. It's like, it's really magical to see that. I mean, what did you think of this interpretation of the Cyclops in that, like, he's terrifying, but also, I don't know, deeply sympathetic?
He is, and it's, I think it was a great idea to have Bill Irwin play him, because Bill Irwin is a celebrated, he's not just a famous actor, he's also a very famous clown and a trained mime. So he's actually, like, Bill Irwin is really good at this stuff of kind of expressing things physically. And yeah, and he is a very pathetic, sad character. He just wants to make his cheese.
Yeah.
And yes, he eats people, but he's not a person. So it's, I mean, I guess he kind of is.
He
but
kind of
maybe
is a
not.
person. I mean, that's the interesting thing, is I think there's this disconnect in communication between them where they learn too late that he can speak.
That he has some intelligence. They could have chatted with him. I know, but he's
Yeah.
like a big baby.
He
Like
is
when
a big baby.
he has one snack, he snacks on one man and he gets sleepy. He immediately has to take a little nap. I'm like, oh.
Well, the thing, it's funny because he's like, they go through this like traumatic thing where he eats. I think he eats maybe two people, but
Yeah, he eats some people.
Okay,
but
he has
eats
two
them,
people.
and it's horrifying.
Yeah.
And then he goes to sleep. Like, to them, it's like this like incredibly nerve-wracking, terrifying scenario, and to him, it's just like, I got a snack. There was a guy here, I ate him, and now I'm just gonna roll over and sleep.
Yeah.
And I think that's not questioned. Like, nobody says, why is he going to sleep?
I know. I love that. I love that. Yeah. I mean, Odysseus gives a little bit of an explanation as to how he perceives the disconnect between them, which is, he says that they were like, why didn't he talk to us before? And he said, well, would you talk to ants? Again, thinking like, yeah, the Cyclops doesn't see them as people. They don't see him as a person, but he doesn't see them as people. He sees them as sheep to be eaten. And there's,
which is why I think also the not having the nobody dialogue, which people are like, oh, why didn't he put that in there? I'm kind of, that would make no sense within the context of the story he's telling.
He's doing something different here. And again, I think this is, so for me, if you think of, again, what is this part representing in Odysseus's journey of reconciliation with his own guilt and shame? What mistake has he made just prior to this, he made the mistake of not following Agamemnon. And you talk about this in your piece, and that, this is, at least to him in that moment, an honorable thing. He's like, I've been following this guy for too long. I followed him to war, and now I'm doing my own thing. But he immediately, and he thinks like he's lucky, we've found land, but he doesn't know where he is. He's off in the middle of nowhere. And then so the one mistake is like they kind of get lost. The second mistake that and again, I think this is the arrogance that he's dealing with, and this is how Nolan is characterizing it and showing it. Again, in the poem, the arrogance comes at the end when he yells to Polyphemus, like, I'm Odysseus, motherfucker. I did this shit to you. Remember my name. But the arrogance, he comes in and he just expects, without speaking to this thing, that this thing is going to, obey Zeus's law, but they're not good guests. I mean, they're just sitting there sort of expecting stuff, and then and they don't even speak to the Cyclops and so on. So in a way, I think this sequence is like sort of him realizing, that he was arrogant. Like that was a part of his downfall, was his arrogance. And in the poem, that he doesn't really realize that, although it depicts his arrogance. Here, I think you could think of him as he's telling the story as kind of recognizing that, like, okay, that was a mistake.
Yeah, and when Eurylochus says, "Couldn't you have shown some mercy?"
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting, mercy is an interesting concept to introduce into this story, because it's like there's no mercy in very little mercy in Homer.
In Homer, yeah.
And
he's like, you went too far. Why'd you do that?
Yeah, exactly.
After he shoots the arrow.
Yeah, it's that is a very Christian idea, idea of mercy, and Nolan himself talked about this. I think I quoted this when he talks about Priam kissing Achilles' hand at the end of the Iliad. Like Nolan's whole thing is, he does believe that the poems contain the seeds of the things that he's put in the movie. Like he doesn't feel like he's completely going off the reservation, as it were, that expression, but like he's not like taking something and completely turning it on its head. He feels that the poems contain enough hints at these other readings, and I agree with that. I haven't read the poem carefully enough to be able to be like, he says it, but absolutely, every once in a while there'll be something where you're like, interesting thing to put in there, And the Iliad is like what I mentioned before about the Iliad, where like, these people are like being slaughtered, and there's just kind of this like almost reveling in the horrible things that's being done to them, and then suddenly there'll be like, a mention of this guy's mom, and you're just like, oh god,
it's a person who just got killed. Yeah, totally. So after the Cyclops, they run back to the boats. There's a lot of running back to the boats, get back to the boats. Then they encounter the Laestrygonians. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but anyway, the Laestrygonians who are the giants, the big giants who with the super cool armor. Again, this is in the poem is like very, it's just a few lines and very little time devoted to this, but I think it's really interesting in Nolan's. I think in the poem they encounter like a woman maybe, but in here you encounter a child, and I think it's really telling that it's a child in particular, because again, one thing you might think of is what would that be to Odysseus is his own child. He's in a way encountering Telemachus, but he's encountering it from the perspective of the threat that Telemachus faces, and then who comes to his rescue is the larger the Papa Laestrygonians, and he's unable to do that, right? So his anxiety of being unable to protect his son is in a way you could think of that's what this scene is representing. But I think it's such a strange and unsettling sequence.
It's funny when I talked to Nolan about the scene, and we talked about Excalibur.
Yeah.
Because he said, Excalibur is actually a good example of what I'm doing here, because he said, Excalibur, the armor in Excalibur is in no way authentic to, Arthur, quote unquote, Arthurian England. Like that is not the kind of armor that you would have seen during, this supposed period.
Right.
You know, so,
Yeah,
but
it's coming like centuries later.
Yeah, it's centuries later.
Yeah.
You're really taking liberties with this stuff, and people have done that over for centuries already.
Yeah.
Taking liberties, painters and everybody. Everybody kind of paints the past colored by their present. Homer is doing that, right? I mean, like he's speaking centuries after these supposed events, um, taking his liberties with the material too. So it's funny. It's like it's all interpretation. It's just air, and everyone else, like what you created around it, is the thing, because the thing itself didn't happen, doesn't exist, and we don't know where it comes from.
Why did he? So did he? The idea was in using Excalibur was just like, look, who cares what these guys' armor would have looked like? We're gonna we create the visual image that is the relevant shorthand for what we want to depict.
Well,
So
I should be clear. We didn't talk about Excalibur as an inspiration for the scene. I said, in that scene, like it feels like suddenly we're in Excalibur.
I see.
The Excalibur is a good example of what we're doing with the whole
that
movie,
kind of thing.
which is,
General, got it. Yeah,
but what he wanted to do, I mean, his idea, or this is what he expressed to me, was, well, we just had a man-eating giant with the Cyclops. To sort of have these guys, I mean, there's so much repetition in Homer, and that's sort of, that's a thing in that type of work. In film, it doesn't quite work that way. It would just be like a retread. What I take from that scene, though, is, especially after you've seen the movie once and you go back, it's we don't know what the Lessergonians look like. We only like all we see is them in armor, and I don't think they live in armor.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think, right? Maybe they do. I don't know, but I think, like, here's a perfect example of, because up until this point, this is the third place they visit. The first place is we get a very brief snippet of it, but it's like they go ashore.
That's right.
And suddenly there's like this town that they burn, and they're taking all their stuff. They basically pillage this place. And Eurylochus is interrogating a guy there, and I think they're speaking another language, which sounds like Greek to me, but I don't know. But this guy's translates what he's saying is being translated to him, and he's like, why did you run away from your village? And the guy's like, we thought you were the people from the sea. And he's like, oh, no, we're not the people from the sea. We're Greeks, we're Greeks from Ithaca. And so that's the first example we see of just the suspicion that has kind of fallen over this world. The Cyclops scene is a little different because it's not the Cyclops' suspicion. Like, the Cyclops probably isn't worried about the people from the sea necessarily. But the Lessergonians, in this sense, is this army is arrayed. This is the army waiting for the people from the sea so they can, like, hack them to pieces. Because there is this question that runs throughout, like, people talk about this. One of the reasons why Penelope is being pressured to, take a new husband is because they need to raise an army to fight the people from the sea in Ithaca. And so the Lessergonians really are, it's an army lying in wait for the invaders from the sea. But when I watched the movie again, I watched that scene and tried to imagine. I was like, this is actually what, like, the people from the sea would experience. Like, they come ashore, whatever they're planning on doing, whether it's they're just looking for some food, or they want to, and the first thing they see is just like this giant wall of dudes in armor just hacking away at them. So that's also just another example of the thing that they're facing in this new world that they've created.
Yeah. Let me come to Cersei. Is this your favorite part, Laura?
Yeah.
And I think, the Cersei sequence is, it's a huge departure from the poem, but also again, totally of a piece with what I think he's doing in this film. So, like, Laura, talk on Cersei.
Oh, okay. What do you want me to talk on?
Well, I don't know. Like, what did you like about it?
I think just as a little horror sequence, I think it was extraordinary. I also just like Cersei. I like how mad she is, and her rant about how all men are pigs. But I mostly just think that the scene of her transforming for the men first, as they sort of are bewitched by her stew and eating it faster and faster and making, like, really, like, guttural sounds and
So
like
gross.
laughing. It's disgusting. And then she starts molding their faces like clay, while humming to herself
Yeah.
into pigs. And we see like even the little hairs on like the
On the
pig
ears,
hairs on
yeah.
the ears and on her fingers as she's molding. I thought it was just extraordinary. And I also like Cersei as a character. And if my sister annoys me, I might turn her into a bird.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lovely scene. And again, she's also living in fear of,
Yeah.
again, an example of sort of the fear and suspicion and distrust that has kind of, taken over the land. Yeah, I thought it's a great scene. The resolution of the Cersei scene in the poem and in the movie is always a little tricky to me because I'm just like, how do you wait, why does she decide not to do, and in the poem there's all sorts of others, like he's taking Molly, it's like all this stuff. But when I first saw the film afterwards, I was thinking to myself, wait, how did that scene end? Like I was like, how did he convince her? Because I just somehow forgot how it ended, how he convinced her to turn them back. And then watching the film again, oh, okay, he grabs her, the crow's neck or something like
Yeah,
that.
he
You
threatens
can't
her.
really see it. It's such a weird cut. It's such a quick cut. We can't really see, like he just kind of reaches over and there's a very quick flash of what he's doing, and I can't tell exactly what he's doing. It's edited in such an interesting way. That whole scene is edited. I didn't get a chance to talk to Jennifer Lane, the editor. I had a million questions I wanted to ask, and that was one of them. Just like how to cut that scene. It's weird because at that point you've kind of settled into the cadence of the story and the poem, which every scene resolves itself in some way, and the scene has to resolve itself. But if this was the first scene that had come, if this was the first person they'd encountered, how would that have felt? Because it does end in a kind of weird sort of, he's like, why don't you let him go? They're not really pigs. She's like, all right.
It's very strange. No, it's very strange. I mean, I think again, if you're thinking of this as an internal thing, then what's going on? What is he confronting here? And one of the things I think he's confronting is the sense in which, I mean, she says this explicitly. She says, the things you prided and celebrated these men for are like the vilest and most debased, aspects of their humanity. Like the desire, what Plato would have called like the appetitive desires. The things, the desire to kill and eat and conquer. And these kind of base impulses, and so she's saying like, look, I just showed you what they were, and she, it's really her blaming him because she knows he's the leader. He is responsible for these men and for their actions, and he, in a way, had kind of molded them into this. I mean, in the Iliad, he's one of the leaders. He's one of the kings who are leading these guys into battle. And I think, so he has to come to terms with that. And so the scene, if you think of it in that sense, by that logic, the scene resolves itself when he has, to a certain extent, come to terms with that. Like, I mean, she said what she needed to say and he's heard her. And then, yeah, and I think but then it's also tricky because he's like, well, then I need your help. Again, the idea being that she has magical powers so she can sort of guide them on the next step of their journey. In the poem, this makes more sense, in that like there is real magic and he's defied her magic, and that's something that she sees as powerful because he's only been able to defy it because Hermes comes down and explains what to do, and so. But he has defied her, and but then anyway, but in the movie, she then sends them to Hades to talk to Tiresias. But that part is a little tricky.
It is, but it's interesting, her line, when he says, "Go back into your," where she says, "Go back to your disguises," when she turns them back into men. But it's if you think about it, the Trojan horse is also a disguise, right? And the Trojan horse in many ways it really symbolizes who they are,
Yes. That's right. They're tricksters. I have to throw this question in there. So we went to see the film with our friends Kat and Grant. Grant added the question, so we'll answer it. Which is, I guess, but you ate the pork belly ramen prior to seeing the movie, but we ate it after. But how did you feel about eating ramen after watching that scene, Laura?
I didn't eat the ramen. If you'll remember, I had curry.
I ate the ramen, and it was very tasty. It is looked a little bit like they were eating a kind of debased ramen.
Yeah, with some like entrails in it or something. Or some
and
squid. I don't know. Like they were like big, long, stretchy white
Did
bits.
you ask Nolan about that? Like, I mean, because it does feel like they were just eating something, but it just looked disgusting.
Oh, what they ate? No, I didn't ask what they ate. I did talk to one of the effects people about that scene. You know, they were very proud of how they figured that scene out, because it was, just the transformations. How are we going to do the transformation? And they actually felt like they didn't want to do kind of the effect of, American Werewolf in London, like close up of a person with like snout coming through their head. They didn't want to do an effect that really drew attention to itself. And they wanted this kind of very sensual, earthy, real physical thing. And so they came up with this idea of like molding these faces and then having these like almost sort of jigsaw puzzle like pieces inside them that she could then kind of, twist in all sorts of different directions and stuff. I don't know. It sounded really gnarly.
Yeah.
I love how physical it is.
So
like it's not a bippity boppity boop. Now you're a bunch of pigs.
Yeah.
Like she's really like getting in there.
Yeah.
The whole film is like that. I mean, that's one of the things I really love about the movie is how just physical and tactile it is.
Absolutely. And then we
That's
go to
the
Hades.
way to do it. It's like if you don't do that, then what's the point of adapting the Odyssey?
Well, I mean, I think there are just different ways of, like there's an audience. I think there's an Odyssey which is like a CGI fest Odyssey, and I think that could be fun too. But this I love that he's committed. Nolan is like, I'm doing it. We're making stuff with our hands. We're hiking up the cliff every day. We're going to where a river of fire meets a river of ice. That is Hades, which is Iceland, I guess. And now we get to Sinon. And
Is this your favorite sequence? You didn't say what your favorite sequence is.
I think we're still getting to my favorite sequence.
Okay.
So okay, so Sinon. So so Laura's dad asked this question, which was, what do we think the role of Sinon is? Like, why does he include Sinon as a character, which is a character which does not appear in the Odyssey, but does appear in later tellings of other sort of stories around it? So yeah, I mean, what's your take on why he wanted to have the character of Sinon and then the role that Sinon is playing? Because this is where we really get a lot of interaction with Sinon in the underworld where Odysseus confronts him.
I mean, I like the idea of there being a character who kind of connects us to the Trojan horse in that way. I mean, you could just keep going back to the Trojan horse scene. Like, I mean, the film goes back to it like 3 times, I think. But I feel like by making it a person, you allow yourself to kind of express some of these ideas about the betrayal. This is something that he does in Inception really well, where like certain characters have to sort of express certain ideas. It's kind of basic movie screenplay narrative idea. It's like some ideas just have to be expressed. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just the question is how you express them. But like Nolan is very much in the of the belief that like these, if you're trying to work an idea into your movie, somebody should say that idea, preferably more than once.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't want, because, and I think this is important for filmmakers like him who are really, who see themselves as popular entertainers. He's not trying to be clever. He's not trying to like hide things. I mean, I can't remember which filmmaker, I think it might have been Kubrick. Somebody once said something like, so much of their job is like trying to hide what they're saying, and yes, there is a certain artfulness to that. And far be it from me to disagree with Stanley Kubrick. But then there is a certain level on which you actually do have to kind of be clear, so that like everybody can sort of understand. And this is the other thing that I find. I talked a little bit about this in my piece about the ending of the Odyssey. Something that Nolan does with his reveals, these big reveals that always come towards the end of his movies that sort of recontextualize everything. They're not twists. Like he's not trying to completely surprise us or shock us. They're not for the most part, they're not the M. Night Shyamalan style. Oh, you thought this was one thing, but actually it's something completely different that I have made sure over the course of the movie that you will not guess. His twists, and they're not really twists, are hiding in plain sight. This was the big revelation with Oppenheimer, because Oppenheimer ends on this, the big reveal, whatever the hell we call it, his, I believe we did line, which suddenly, it's like you see all these flashes of like the future nukes being built and him in the plane with like the bombs flying overhead. That great montage. Go back and watch Oppenheimer again. I'm like, wait, every single one of those shots is in the rest of the movie. Like you see, like that shot of him in the plane with the bombs flying overhead. We see that when they first mentioned the plane. That shot of him like standing over like the various nuclear missiles that have been built. That's in earlier parts of the movie. This is the thing that Nolan does that I think is kind of underrated, is that these reveals, they're not there to like totally shock us. They're there to sort of explain something that we have been kind of sensing over the course of the movie, right? There's this something about the film and the way it builds and the way it kind of deploys information that like we're with it, and yet we can constantly sense that something is missing. And the final scene or the big reveal at the end, the climactic moment for Nolan is always that piece suddenly comes into place, and suddenly
it sort of comes into focus in a way.
Sense, right? I mean, that's the thing about The Prestige, is that like there's this twist at the end of The Prestige. There are actually two twists at the end of The Prestige. Both of them are, he does nothing to hide them. Like you watch the movie again, they're there the whole time.
One of the things you said in one of your pieces is that Sinon, in some sense, represents an innocent and honesty that Odysseus can no longer have, and that's because, as you say, that it's in the guise of Sinon that he, returns to Ithaca and is able to speak with Penelope. And I think, so in that sense, he's betrayed Xenia at this point, and he's lied to Sinon, and these things come together. And of course, and they're directly related, because it was his lie to Sinon which helped convince the Trojans to take the horse in, because they needed someone who truly believed that that it was an empty horse.
And also because Sinon, because he dies before the betrayal is revealed and before Zeus's law is fully betrayed, Sinon maintains a certain
innocence. Yes. Oh, that's right. Well, yeah, and he's
before the fall.
He's innocent in all the ways. He doesn't know. He dies before the action is committed. Yes, and
feels genuine betrayal. That's the other thing that's important, because it's not like, listen, man, you had to lie to me, but in the end, it was worth it because you got to kill all these Trojans. It's kind of like, what? Why did you lie to me?
Yeah. And I only find out when I'm in the underworld from some other dead guys who told me that it worked, and that that we actually won, and this and that. Yeah, and I think this is something that this is a very Nolan thing. I mean, this is Murph in Interstellar, the sort of noble lie that he has to feed characters. I mean, this is Maul in Inception, and similarly, the whole notion of Inception. I have to incept her with this idea to convince her that we need to wake up. And it's again, what is he confronting? He's confronting the betrayal and the lie that he at the center of the horse. Then he gets the prophecy from Tiresias. Well, we also talked to Agamemnon. I'm just going to move through some of this so that we can keep on track. But Tiresias is great. I mean, I think that part is my favorite image of the film, is James Remar coming out of the dirt and just having, it's almost like there's still a layer of dirt on top of him. Even it's like a shroud or whatever. I love that. And he gets the prophecy, and he learns that all his men are going to die, and it doesn't matter what he does; they're going to die. He says, "I defy the gods," but it as we're gonna find out, it doesn't matter. And then it just moving us out of Hades, we get to the siren song, and the sirens is my favorite part. I think it is just a really remarkable sequence, and you get, I think, some of the most beautiful writing in the film, and it happens so fast because it's in his description of what the siren song is, and it's like he's got every following sentence is in another just gem of an interesting idea that we don't get a chance to explore, but like is just laid out, the itch you want to scratch that you can't reach, you find you can't reach it. It's an unbearable thing. It's the thing you most want is what you can't have. And the thing that you can't have is what you already had and lost. You're like, wait a second. There's like so many brilliant things happening here.
Well, it's the whole movie. I mean, because that's the one where he says at the end, he says, and it told me that I didn't really
want to go home. I know. It's so many just amazing lines. I think it's just, it's so lovely. And I almost wish that he had like just given that more time to that speech, because it's just really pretty. The other thing I will mention about the sirens, and I noticed this the second time, and I think it's really, really interesting just thematically, but the music cue of the sirens, that's the same music cue that plays when he goes and talks to Penelope in disguise as Sinon. So that same music cue, again, there's something about the what he learns from the sirens about not wanting to go home,
the promises he failed to keep,
nostalgia, the promises he failed to keep, and then that's being connected to Penelope. It plays, and if you listen, the two tracks are on the soundtrack are called Sirens and Penelope, and the later, I think it's the Penelope, the one that comes at the very end, or actually no, it's not called Penelope. I take it back. It's Sirens, and then I think it's Odysseus. Yes, it's Odysseus. It's called Odysseus. And it's like they start exactly the same. It's remarkable. It's like, oh man, he's really drawing a tight connection here between these dimensions. Anyway, what did you think of the sirens?
Oh, they're beautiful. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful moment. Beautiful bit of acting from Matt Damon. Like underrated performance, actually, by Matt Damon. We talk so much about how great everyone else is, and they are great. Like Pattinson is great. Anne Hathaway, throw Oscars at her. I think Elliot Page is really good. Like they're all doing great work, but like Matt Damon is like holding the whole fucking thing together. Like he's doing so much. So much of this movie does not work if he doesn't nail every scene,
Yeah, and it's not like a really big performance, but like because it's so interior. But I saw one criticism that like he just was like almost like looked tired or burdened the whole time because he's burdened by guilt, so he's not as like lively or interesting as the Odysseus, the like trickster mercurial Odysseus that we know from the Homer poem. But I just think I think he's extraordinary.
But in the siren sequence, he is kind of, because he's like, oh no, yeah, like I want to hear, I want to hear the thing. Like I'll be the first one to hear it. He gets a little like spark of like, woohoo! I get to do something new. You get these sparks here and there, but yes, this is a dude who's burdened by guilt and shame and regret. So he's not going to be like the life of the party. Also, he's a leader burdened by the crown of leadership, and his men come to resent him for what they see as his mistakes along the way. Anyway, I think that sequence is great. We get Scylla and Charybdis. I have no idea how they did any of this. It just looks so good. The whirlpool. I'm like, what the hell is? I know it's in camera, but how did they do it? I just think it's amazing.
Explains it for you in one of his articles.
Well, yeah. So Bilge, so they did something with jets, or I don't know how they did this.
Yeah, no, they basically just had jet skis and boats just going around and around in circles to try and create that sort of just the wake that you see when boats are passing by you, on the shore. So they did that, and then obviously the center of the whirlpool, they just kind of digitally just drop down, like they can do that. But yeah, no, it's great. I mean, it's so quick, it's like, and I love that. I love the fact that it doesn't become this whole fucking set piece where they have to fight the waves, and it's just literally just we got to do this, let's go, and then they get into the other thing, and then and then Scylla comes, and then that takes like 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's very fast.
I know.
Chop.
I know. I really don't love long movies. This is like something that's well established on this podcast, but I'm also like, I respect how, I think it's amazing how he plows through this material. Things are so fast, but it doesn't feel too rushed. He gives space to the things that need to have space. Also, love that this movie's not two movies. Don't like that thing. Don't
Oh,
like
yeah.
that where they have part 1 and part 2. This movie could have so easily been the Odyssey part 1 and part 2. No, thank
He
you.
hates
Nolan's
that.
he's not
He-
going to do that.
I figured.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's and that's the other thing about the poem is that the poem, in terms of the amount of space, quote unquote, that it gives to various incidents that have since become iconic, like
Fast.
the balances are all off.
Yeah.
right? The Lotus Eaters are like 3 lines. I mean,
Yep.
it's the whole thing is they spend a ton of time with the Cyclops, but like but all these other things are like so short, and yet they become so kind of indelible in Western culture and as kind of various metaphors. I mean, people will talk about like Scylla and Charybdis or whatever, and it's like an expression, and he's got to do it in the movie, and it's like, how much time are you going to spend on this? Like, there really
2.5
isn't
minutes.
No, it's great. No, it's great. I mean, yeah, and then we have Apollo, and then they're cursed by the sun god. They the thing, and then they their ship is crashed.
The one thing in the movie that I feel is a little lacking, and not lacking, it's not the word, because it doesn't bother me because the whole thing moves so well. But the Calypso stuff for me doesn't. It's like, first of all, he's bringing, like, Calypso's holding together multiple things from the poem, like the Lotus Eaters, and the bag of winds and all this other stuff, right? Nausicaa. I mean, there's all these elements from like and you have to do that. Any adaptation of the Odyssey has that. There's a really fun, I think from 1954, thereabouts, the Ulysses starring Kirk Douglas and Anthony Quinn and Silvana Mangano, which is an adaptation of the Odyssey, and it has a lot of the same stuff, but that's like a very kind of sword and sandal, Italian peplum / Hollywood kind of version of it. But the Calypso stuff for me, I feel like he's essentially turns her into a narrative device.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Yes.
know.
She's
I feel the
primarily a
same.
narrative device. It doesn't really give Charlize Theron, who's a really good actor. I mean, she gets dialogue, but she doesn't get to really do that much. And it is kind of, she's literally just kind of there to like just to hold the narrative. She's like narrative glue, and then she has to like sort of allow the next step of the thing to happen.
Yeah, I'd be
It's
like,
funny,
be on
like,
your way.
Zendaya has so much more to do than her.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Hathaway too, like, I think so. Calypso, I mean, it's been a minute. I did not reread the Odyssey, but Justin did, and multiple translations, and then told me everything about it. So I feel like I have. But Zeus tells her via another messenger that he's got
I think it's Hermes.
Hermes, that she's got to give up her boy toy.
Yeah.
And she's just like, why? You get to do whatever you want. Like, how come I don't get my boy
Yeah,
toy?
she demands that she calls out the double standard.
Yeah, so Penelope gets some more dialogue where she's periodically she gets sick of Telemachus's whining, and she's like, who's been queen for 10 years? Me, motherfuckers. There has been something on this throne. I've been holding it together.
Yeah.
And really bringing home like how few choices women have in this world and how to hold power. As a woman, it looks very different and is more conniving and is more subtle than it is for men. But yeah, I do hope that Charlize Theron gets to do something else with Nolan, where she's not just like the nursemaid to somebody's like fractured consciousness, and she's kind of like rehabilitating them.
Yeah.
I think she's fine in it, but that is also like something that I was
Calypso,
like,
yeah, in the
give her
poem,
more.
she's a much more complicated character. The relationship is more complicated. The relationship is also something which completely destabilizes to the modern audience the central thing Nolan is trying to do with this. So it just does not work in his story, within the context of his story. Like the fact that they are in a relationship and they're having sex all the time, and
that is completely elided. Yeah.
Yeah, like all.
Yeah, I mean, there's no sex in this.
There's no sex.
And
Or
there's a lot of sex in the Odyssey.
Yeah. Or references that they were having sex. Like she was like, we were happy, but she kind of makes it sound like they were just eating lotus and holding hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
walking on the beach.
Anyway, I mean, these are choices that make his. I think they make his Odyssey of a piece with itself, but
yes,
it's
totally.
very different. He gets home. Okay, now he's got to kill the suitors, and boy does he kill the suitors. But before we do that, I mean, is Antinous, played by Rob Pattinson, the like sneak surprise, like character, winning character of this film. Just like, what a hilarious performance. What a just all in performance. And is the line, "Can we get these beggars out of here?" just the number one line of the year?
And what I love about that line, because he said that he was inspired by James Woods in Casino.
That's awesome.
The way he delivers that line, every time I see it, I'm like, I see Danny Houston. And Danny Houston is actually kind of a John Huston, has that voice. But it is funny, he kind of gets that like weird sort of fake Irish lilt. No, but I love that performance because he's like villain number one, but he's so self-aware, and there are all these little moments, tiny little moments, but they're definitely there. Like even at the end after he says, "Will someone get these beggars out of here?" The little like slightly disgusted expression that he gives afterwards is kind of like,
yeah, like a little cringy.
He is so self-aware. There's this great moment where it's almost like he's finally wooed Penelope, right? He's talking to her and he says, I can't remember the exact exchange of dialogue, but she says something like, "What about my son?
What about Telemachus?" Yeah.
And he says, "The throne is his."
Yep.
And then he says, "Unless you and I have a child of our own." And then she her face drops, and there's this great little expression on his face. It is equivalent to Jim Carrey in Liar Liar when during the trial at the end. Have you guys seen Liar Liar?
Yeah,
of course.
The trial at the end where he can't tell a lie.
Yeah.
Somebody asks, every time they ask him a question, he has to tell the truth, and
he's like, "Damn it!
Damn it!" And he's like, "Unless you and I have a child of our own." He's just,
damn it! Why did I have to say that?
But he does all these little things. He's so great.
Good. He's so good. I just love how committed he is to be a sniveling, the guy the audience is rooting for to die. And you've seen it with a paying audience, right?
Yes. So that was the thing. The first 3 times I saw it, it was always just kind of like empty room, just like 3 or 4 people. And then I actually, the day it opened, I went to the theater and watched it with a paying audience.
Yeah. How was this?
This was the best screening I've had, and that wasn't even like IMAX. It was just, it was so funny because it's like such a classic sort of modern day viewing experience. Cause it's like, it's a big theater. I sit down, I like to sit near the front, and this guy comes right before the movie starts, and he proceeds to open up like an incredibly crinkly plastic bag, takes out a giant 2-liter bottle of soda, places it like right next to me on the thing, and then has like another like soda that he actually is drinking, and proceeds to eat like a full meal, like a cooked, smelly meal. and then he puts on headphones and he looks at his phone, and he's like watching like Instagram videos or something on his phone. And like the headphones are like not really working. Like I can hear. I can hear. Despite that, this was the best viewing of the movie I've had since.
The audience must have just been totally.
The audience was totally into it. And they were just absolutely cheering during the massacre of the suitors, to the point where I was like, with an audience, this scene reads totally differently than it does like when you're by yourself and you've just been told about the betrayal of Zeus's law. Suddenly it's like, wait, what? Got to kill some people.
But this is the thing. Like it's portrayed in the poem as like righteous vengeance, and that's what you want. You want the audience to have the analogous experience. They can't be the case if he's cutting people's genitals off and feeding them to dogs. Like, the audience is suddenly going to get quiet. They're going to be like, "Wait a second, hold on. I'm not cheered for that." But, you can cheer for the death of these guys, and, and they're killed in kind of classic Hollywood ways. He chokes on the lot, as he's stabbed. And yeah, it's just great. And the other thing I want to mention about this sequence that I think is so fucking cool, because I've been listening to the score, and, Nolan has... I'm sure he's talked to you about this. He's talked to other people about the shepherd's tone. He uses the shepherd tone a lot he used it in Dunkirk. He most famously, I think, in Dunkirk, but he had used it prior in like Dark Knight. This is this thing where, you get the notes that go up, and then as they go higher, it's just like a steadily increasing note. And as it goes higher, it gets quieter. And so you bring in a low note underneath it, and then as it gets sort of higher, it gets more loud. And so it sounds like this thing that's getting higher and higher forever. This note that keeps getting higher forever. Think the Dark Knight with the Joker's thing with the violin sound of the Joker. Well, in this movie, he does the equivalent of a shepherd tone rhythmically. So and that happens in this sequence. So you get the drums, and it's getting faster and faster. But then what happens is as it gets faster and faster, the quarter notes or eighth notes get replaced with quarter notes, and the quarter notes get replaced with half notes that are coming in underneath it. And so then they come in, and so you get this thing that sounds like it's just getting faster and faster forever. The equivalent of a shepherd tone rhythmic. I was like, that's fucking cool as shit. He's been doing this thing. He's been iterating on these ideas, and I think this is the first time he's used the rhythmic shepherd tone or whatever. I don't know what it would be called. And I noticed that, and I was just like, that's so cool. And that's contributing to like the feeling of like this tension building in this sequence.
It's like a frenzy
that never ends. It just keeps going and going and going and going and going, and it never reaches a kind of end point.
I mean, Ludwig Göransson is also really good at these technical solutions to kind of emotional problems in music. Like I talked to him a little bit about this one, and he told me about finding the proper way to play the lyre, and then the aeolus, is that what it's called? The ancient flute,
the dual flute thing,
because they were like, this actually is. Like, nobody knows exactly how to play this thing. Like, the reeds for it are gone, right? So they had to kind of actually, they do have to figure out how to play it. But then he went and like recorded Albanian shepherds, cool. Isopolyphonic singing, and then he's just, this idea of like, because he didn't want this big orchestral score, he found all these kind of quote unquote authentic instruments. They're not really authentic. I mean, they're just old, but interesting sounds that we haven't heard before,
and we don't hear in this context.
No, that's exactly, and it's the film that they said that they looked at was The Last Temptation of Christ, and that Peter Gabriel's score does a lot of that. I mean, that was very new for back then, like incorporating Middle Eastern instruments and stuff into that type of story. So yeah, like they love these technical challenges, and they love this idea. I mean, Nolan has always been all over this idea of like kind of taking a theme, like taking not a musical theme, but an actual theme, an idea that's in the film, and trying to find a way to embody that musically in a way that doesn't just resonate as like emotional response to music, but also like almost a theoretical concept. Because the classic example of this, I always cite this, is Inception. The Brahms sound in Inception is actually the Edith Piaf score slowed down, which is like an actual narrative device in the movie.
It's
like,
so
how
cool.
well does that fucking work?
It's
like,
so cool, and it's so cool that like the end credits. I think we've talked about this before, but like the end credits as it's playing the song, it slows it down, and so then it ends. Like the very last thing is the like dom dom. It's so cool, and it's there in the film. He's like he's telling you directly that this is what he's doing. I love it. Can I maybe end on this note, because he said something to you that I thought I saw this, I immediately quoted, and I want to just kind of get your reflections on this, Bilge. He said to you that it's a middle-aged love story, and then he mentioned that Emma and him are now empty nesters. And I think like one of the things for me that this is so resonant with is like, because he's making these very personal films, often about his family and about his relationship to his family. And that I am, we're about 10 years behind Mr. Nolan. I think you are maybe closer in terms of your being contemporaneous with him. But like, so what he was experiencing in Inception I understood only after we had kids, but we had kids much after. So I'm like getting, and I think similarly. So now I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about the idea of being empty nesters, and about and maybe this is portrayed in the film as like him going off into the sunset with Anne Hathaway, and like anyway, how did that, when he said that, like how did that make you feel? How did that influence like how you see the film and think about it?
I mean, that specific, when he said that, he kind of tossed it at the end of
Yeah.
like some other comment that he had made. So it was kind of, oh, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know. But what it reinforced for me, and this was actually a thing I talked to Emma Thomas about when I did the Oppenheimer piece, about how personal all these movies are for him. But not just personal insofar as he wants to be back with his family. Like that's there too. But this idea of seeing these films through a parent's eye, not in terms of, oh, these are the children, these are the parents, like that kind of thing, but in terms of a parent's anxieties. And we talked about this. I think we talked about this. The line in Tenet that everybody hates, that
including my son.
Yeah.
Yes.
That like never fails to like send chills up my spine.
Yep.
Because that's such a kind of, I mean, we talked about it, but it is very much, yes, no, that is absolutely how a parent experiences the world.
Yeah.
When you tell me that like, climate change is going to basically destroy humanity in 20 years, I'm not thinking of it in terms of like what's going to happen to all these millions of people. Obviously, I'm also thinking of it, I'm seeing it through the eyes of my child. Like, what's his experience of this going to be like? And this is a thing that Nolan does in his movies, especially kind of the later films, that is very much in keeping with the way a parent experiences the future. Like, because the future is a place in which we have to live without ever being there. Like, right? I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about the year 2063. In the year 2063, if I make it to the year 2063, I would be 90 years old, right? And I don't expect to make it to the year 2063. But my son would be just 1 year older than I am now. And I'm just like, 2063 seems so impossibly far off. Like, it's like one of those, like, it's like a Blade Runner number. It's like when they came up with Blade Runner, they threw out this date, and like we have since passed that date.
Yeah.
2019.
They throw out these dates, and like, at some point, people are going to get to that date and they're going to be like, hey, this didn't happen or this happened or whatever. Like 2001, A Space Odyssey, So I think about the year 2063, and to me, it's a sci-fi year. It's a sci-fi date. It's just an abstract sci-fi, we're going to be on Jupiter kind of date. And it's like, no, my son is just going to be middle-aged then, possibly with children of his own, But so much of being a parent has to be like projecting yourself into a future in which you will not exist, but they will. And so much of Nolan's films are like that's what Interstellar is all about, right? That's what Tenet kind of is about.
Totally.
Like once you realize what that movie is about, that's what it's about. That's what Oppenheimer is. Like that's Oppenheimer at the end of that movie envisioning a future he won't inhabit, but that he essentially created. And so too, the Odyssey has that. It's kind of, I mean, here he's talking about the end of civilization. He's not speaking necessarily as a parent, but very much a kind of like, but also at the end, they have given, I mean, they're going off into the unknown West. They're going off into this unknown, who knows where they're going. They could be dying, basically. Yeah. They're going to the lost city of Z.
Yeah.
They reference another Robert Pattinson,
Tom Holland joint. Yeah.
But there is the sense that they have, like, Telemachus is king of Ithaca now. Like, he has to deal with the wreckage
it's his responsibility. Yeah, he's passing the torch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you have to pass the torch, and you have to have some trust that the future will be okay.
And I think this is the other aspect where Odysseus' journey is an inward one. He has to forgive himself for whatever mistakes he's made along the way. You have to forgive yourself and recognize that you did your best, and now you're passing it on. For better or for worse, this is the world you've left your kids.
I fucked up. That's on me.
Yeah, that's right. Just like Shia LaBeouf says.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't remember what your question was, but
I was just curious, like how that affected
Middle-aged love story.
middle-aged love story,
Yeah,
and just
yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
I do also like that we're at a period of time, at least in these last two movies, where we're seeing like some grown-ass relationships, and like that's great. Like I think even though Penelope and Odysseus don't spend a lot of time in this movie, I think the two scenes where they get together, where you see them together first before he's leaving. And he's sort of, there's some exposition land, but I think they're really great in that scene in establishing how well they communicate, the intimacy of that, how much they understand, how much they're on the same page with one another and push one another and really respect one another, to the point where when he gets there and he's cloaked and saying his name is Sinon, and it's like, well, what if there was a guy named Odysseus? Like she gets it. And when without saying anything, she has set up the situation. Because then, and
they know each other. That's common ground between them.
Yes.
He's like, I will have a weapon. Don't worry.
Yeah, because Telemachus is like 2 steps behind. Like he's like, well, wait, how are you gonna have a weapon? And he's like, Penelope's already figured that out. Like we didn't need to say anything because we know each other.
They know each other so
and we've
well.
been through the shit. And I've had to we've had our temptations and we've had our struggles and we've had our ups and downs, but we know each other inside and out. And we respect each other, and we silently, just like him and Kit.
Who does that remind you of?
Kitty,
Kitty and Oppenheimer going into the deposition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's right.
And I love Oppenheimer's Oppie's relationship with Kitty, and nobody else gets from the outside, but they do.
Yeah,
and
that's in later viewings. I can't remember if we talked about this when we did the podcast, but in later viewings of the film, that's the part that I found the most moving in Oppenheimer.
Mm-hmm.
Her little moment, their little moment at the end.
Right before the
Yeah.
Bilge, thank you so much for being here. And I should just say, so you have, I think, at least 4 pieces on the Odyssey right now.
Four, yeah. No, I did. I mean, there's the main piece I did with kind of just interviewing Nolan and various people involved in the film about how they made it. That was, that piece runs before the film comes out. So there's all sorts of shit that I want to talk about that I can't. That happened with Oppenheimer too, where I was just like, I'm saving the real juice for the endings piece when I can actually get into the meat of the movie. So I did the same thing here. And then, I did. I mean, and then I broke out the interview that I did with Matt Damon for that piece. For Oppenheimer, there were a whole bunch of pieces that I was able to do because, if you remember, the strikes hit right at that time, and they couldn't promote the movie. So I said to them, "Hey, your actors that literally can't do interviews right now. They have all these interviews that they did with me before the strikes hit. Would it be okay if we ran these as Q&As?" And they were like, "Great, please, let's do that." So we did that. We didn't have to do that this time, and I also didn't speak to nearly that many people for this one, but. But we did run the Matt Damon one, and then I just did a piece for Vulture. They wanted someone because I'd seen it early. They needed to assign this early, but it was kind of should I take my kids to see the Odyssey?
I see. Yeah. So all this is available at vulture.com.
It's all at vulture.com. Yeah.
Yep. And so people should check it out and follow Bilge on Twitter. You're continue to be active on Twitter, I think, Bilge. We're not on Twitter basically anymore. But
I continue to be on Twitter against all of my better judgment. Just because I'm just like, there's a part of me that's like, if everybody, I mean, I don't want to kind of lump myself in with the quote unquote the good people, but it's like if all the good people leave Twitter, then
I know it's
worse. It's still going to be there.
You are one of the good people, Bilge. People should follow you. You're at Bilge Ebiri at Twitter. You're also on Instagram and
I'm on Blue Sky.
So check out Bilge's stuff and read it. And Bilge will have you back in 3 or 4 years. No, for the next Christopher Nolan movie. No, we'll hopefully have you back before that. But if you be down, I think we did this at the end of Oppenheimer. I said when his next movie, if we could just pre-book you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for making the time.
We love talking to you about.
I'm always happy to talk. I mean, I'm always happy. You guys do this right.
We're gonna go all the way in.
We do
on
it
this
long-winded. Did he write 9 pages of notes? You bet he did.
I mean, there's so much I didn't even get to, honestly, but it's fine. We got to get you out of here, Bilge. Thank you so much. And as for us, we are at CowsPod on all the social media sites. You can find us on the web at cowspod.com. In 2 weeks, we'll be talking to This was a flip around. We'll be talking to Tushar Menon, my colleague at MIT, about Looper. So I had advertised that prior, but that got bumped around because we wanted to make sure the Odyssey episode got in here for people to engage with. The Odyssey is out fresh in theaters. So Tushar in 2 weeks on Looper. See you guys then. Bye.